Can someone please explain to me how we are allowing one of the most significant fisheries in the country to be ruined? Not through overfishing or poor management practices, but through pollution. Pollution that could be mitigated. Pollution that could be limited. Imagine the most productive body of water in the United States. An estuary so rich it once produced more seafood per square mile than nearly anywhere on Earth. Where oyster reefs were so dense they were a hazard to navigation. Where blue crabs and striped bass filled the water in numbers early settlers could hardly believe. Now imagine that same body of water, 40 years into a federally mandated, legally binding cleanup effort, still graded a D+ by independent scientists. Still generating a dead zone every summer that suffocates everything in it. Still watching blue crab populations hit their lowest level in recorded history. That is the Chesapeake Bay in 2026. And the story of how we got here is one of political failure, agricultural exemptions, and a federal agency being systematically defunded, right when it's needed most. Section 1. What the Chesapeake is. The Chesapeake Bay is North America's largest estuary, 200 miles long, 30 miles across at its widest, and averaging just 21 feet deep. That shallowness matters enormously. There is very little water column for toxins and nutrients to dilute into. Its watershed covers 64,000 square miles across 6 states and Washington, D.C. More than 18 million people live here, including the residents of Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and Richmond. Every raindrop that falls on a farm in central Pennsylvania, a parking lot in suburban Virginia, or a lawn in suburban Maryland eventually makes its way into the bay, carrying whatever it picks up along the way. Before European settlement, this watershed was mostly forest, wetland, and meadow. The forests filtered runoff. The wetlands absorbed nutrients. The oyster reefs, the densest on Earth, filtered the entire volume of the bay every 3 to 4 days. The system was resilient and self-sustaining. 400 years of colonization, industrialization, and industrial-scale agriculture changed all of that. Section 2. How it got this bad. The bay's decline unfolded over centuries but accelerated dramatically in the 20th century. The first wave was deforestation and agriculture. As settlers cleared forests for crops, natural filters were removed. Sediment clouded the bay's waters, blocking sunlight from the seagrass meadows that served as nurseries for fish and crabs. Those meadows began dying off and have never fully recovered. The second wave was overharvesting. Oysters, once so abundant they hindered navigation, were strip-mined by commercial operations. Their population collapsed to roughly 1 to 2% of historical levels. That is not a typo. And because a single oyster filters up to 50 gallons of water per day, their near disappearance meant the bay lost its most powerful natural water purification system. The third and most persistent wave came from nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus from farm fertilizers, animal waste, suburban lawn chemicals, sewage treatment plants, and even air pollution from cars and power plants. These nutrients fertilize algae. The algae blooms explosively, and when it dies and decomposes, bacteria strip the dissolved oxygen from the water. The result is what scientists call hypoxia, and what everyone else calls a dead zone. The bay's dead zone has been measured every summer since the 1980s. On average it covers 1.2 cubic miles. In 2025, scientists reported it remained at average levels, which sounds reassuring until you remember that average means a recurring annual ecological catastrophe that has been the bay's normal condition for decades. Section 3, the cleanup, and the record of failure. Governments did not ignore the bay's distress. They just didn't act effectively enough. In 1983, the governors of Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, along with the EPA and D.C., signed the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, a landmark commitment to restore the estuary. Additional agreements followed in 1987, 1992, 2000, and 2014. Each had more ambitious targets. Each fell short. The most important step came in 2010 when the EPA established the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load, the pollution diet. It set legally binding limits on nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. It required states to develop implementation plans. It gave the EPA enforcement authority. The target, all necessary pollution-reducing practices in place by 2025. It is now 2026. The states missed the deadline. Nitrogen reductions reached only 59% of the 2025 goal, meaning pollution was still 37 million pounds per year above the cleanup target. Pennsylvania, which contributes the most nitrogen through the Susquehanna River, achieved only 29% of its nitrogen reduction goal. The consequences of Pennsylvania's failure are borne downstream in Maryland and Virginia. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation's most recent State of the Bay report gave the Bay a D+. The same grade as 2020 and 2018. In 40 years of coordinated effort and billions spent, fundamental bay health has not improved meaningfully. Section 4. The sources of pollution. Agriculture is by far the largest contributor, approximately 46% of the nitrogen entering the bay, more than all other sources combined. Fertilizer on cropland, manure from the massive poultry industry on the Delmarva Peninsula, and nutrient runoff during rain events all flow toward the bay. Because this is non-point source pollution, spread across millions of acres rather than from a single pipe, it is much harder to regulate and enforce. Urban stormwater is the second major category and the only growing one. Every new road, rooftop, and parking lot sends rainfall racing across pavement into streams, carrying fertilizers, oil, and other pollutants with it. As the watershed's population grows, this problem grows with it. Wastewater treatment has actually been the Bay's one genuine success story. Upgraded technology in Maryland and Virginia has dramatically reduced plant discharges. It proves a simple point: when clear regulatory requirements exist and are funded, progress happens. The remaining challenges, agriculture and stormwater, are harder, more politically sensitive, and less amenable to technological fixes. And 1/3 of the Bay's nitrogen pollution doesn't come from land at all, it falls from the sky. Nitrogen oxides from cars and power plants are deposited across the entire watershed with every rainfall, making air pollution inseparable from bay pollution. Section 5. Why nothing has been done. The science has been clear for decades. There is no mystery about what the Bay needs. What is missing is political will. Agricultural interests have been the single most powerful obstacle to meaningful cleanup. The farming and poultry industries have lobbied aggressively against mandatory nutrient reduction requirements. The result has been a cleanup strategy built almost entirely on voluntary measures, cover crops, stream buffers, nutrient management plans, that farmers are asked but not required to adopt, with inspections too few and too infrequent to matter. A landmark study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences put it plainly: current programs are less effective than they could be precisely because they are voluntary and lack sufficient inspections and oversight. Pennsylvania is the most glaring case study. Its Susquehanna River carries more nitrogen and phosphorus than any other bay tributary. It has the most farmland in the watershed. It has the weakest compliance record. Environmental advocates have long called on the EPA to enforce its legal authority against Pennsylvania. The EPA has repeatedly declined to act with sufficient force, because Pennsylvania's agriculture industry is politically powerful, and because the damage is felt downstream, in states with no leverage over Harrisburg. Meanwhile, the EPA has been systematically weakened. The Trump administration proposed cutting the EPA's budget by more than half, from $9.1 billion to $4.2 billion. The agency has already lost more than 4,000 employees. Environmental justice programs have been eliminated. The Bay program's critical computer modeling update was delayed due to resource constraints. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation's conclusion is direct: without federal enforcement, voluntary state programs will not deliver what the Bay needs. Section 6. What has been lost? The damage shows up in what is gone. Blue crabs, the cultural icon of the Chesapeake, the centerpiece of crab feasts from Baltimore to Richmond, have declined to their lowest recorded population ever. A population that reached nearly 800 million in 1990 has crashed. Commercial crabbers who built lives on the water are struggling to survive. Striped bass face stress and disease linked to hypoxia and warming waters. Oysters remain at 1 to 2% of historical levels. Without a functional oyster population, the Bay cannot filter its own water, and without clean water, oysters cannot recover. The two are inseparably linked in a feedback loop that only breaks if pollution is reduced. Seagrass meadows that once blanketed the bay floor have never recovered. Without them, the bottom is destabilized, nutrients recirculate, algae blooms intensify, and light penetration stays too low for grasses to return. The economic losses, across seafood, tourism, recreation, and real estate, run to billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs. Section 7. The solutions. The solutions exist. The knowledge exists. What is missing is the decision to implement them at scale. On agriculture, making cover crops, riparian buffers, and precision nutrient management mandatory, or conditioning farm subsidies on compliance, would dramatically accelerate progress beyond what voluntary programs have delivered. On wastewater, continuing to fund enhanced nutrient removal upgrades, especially in Pennsylvania, would close a major remaining gap. It works when it is funded. On stormwater, green infrastructure, rain gardens, permeable pavement, urban tree canopies, living shorelines, can intercept and filter runoff before it reaches waterways. The pace of installation needs to far outpace the pace of development. On oysters, expanding sanctuaries where harvesting is prohibited and reefs can rebuild naturally is essential, despite industry resistance. The science on this is unambiguous: restored oyster reefs improve surrounding water quality. This needs to be done at a scale 10 times larger than current efforts. On enforcement, the EPA must actually use the legal authority Congress gave it. 40 years of missed deadlines without meaningful consequences for noncompliance is the Bay's central structural failure. Section 8. What happens if nothing changes? The projections come from credible, peer-reviewed science and the Bay program's own modeling. Sea level rise is the most insidious compounding threat. Over the past century, Bay water levels rose approximately 1 foot, nearly twice the global average, because the land around the Bay is also sinking through subsidence. Maryland Sea Grant projects an additional 0.8 to 1.6 feet of rise by 2050. By century's end, that number could exceed 4 feet. The Chesapeake Bay region is the third most vulnerable area in the United States to sea level rise, behind only Louisiana and South Florida. Rising temperatures make everything worse. Bay summer water temperatures have increased by nearly half a degree per decade, twice the global average. Warmer water holds less oxygen, so dead zones intensify even without any additional pollution. The Bay program's own modeling found that climate change alone would require an additional 9.1 million pounds of nitrogen reduction per year, beyond the already missed targets, just to maintain current water quality standards. Heavy rainfall events in the Northeast have increased by more than 70% since 1958. Every major storm sends a new surge of nitrogen and phosphorus into the Bay. Those storms are becoming more frequent and more intense. If enforcement stays weak, if Pennsylvania continues to lag, if the EPA budget keeps getting cut, if agricultural exemptions persist, and if sea levels and temperatures continue rising, the Bay will not recover. Dead zones will persist. Blue crabs will keep declining. Oyster restoration will be overwhelmed by ongoing pollution. And communities built around the Bay will face an accelerating erosion of the resource their livelihoods and culture depend on. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation said it plainly: the dead zone is an existential threat to life in the Chesapeake Bay. With climate change intensifying, now is the time to ramp up work, not back away from it. The Chesapeake Bay is not a lost cause. Upgraded wastewater plants work. Restored wetlands work. Nascent oyster reef recovery is real. The Bay is more resilient than a D+ suggests, and its advocates have never stopped fighting. But resilience has limits. 40 years of legally binding commitments have not delivered a healthy Bay. Climate change is erasing hard-won gains. And the agency responsible for enforcing those commitments is being dismantled at the exact moment the stakes are highest. The 18 million people who live in this watershed, and the millions more who eat its seafood, visit its shores, and depend on its water, deserve a government that enforces its own laws. They deserve an EPA with the staff and resources to do its job. And they deserve a farming community held to the same standards of accountability as everyone else. So why are we allowing one industry to completely destroy another? Why are we not regulating their discharges? Why are we standing for so many missed deadlines? Share this if it opened your eyes to something happening in your backyard. And if you've spent time on the Bay, crabbing, sailing, fishing, swimming, drop a comment and tell me what you've seen change. Those stories matter. The Bay's recovery is still possible. But it requires choosing it.